What if Mumbo didn't accept the 5 fish? Hello, my name is Dobby and welcome to a video on Last Life. Last Life, as I hope you know, is a recent popular YouTube series wherein a bunch of creators spawn onto a small world limited by the world border and essentially have to be the last man standing with a various number of lives, starting randomly between 2 and 6. You can trade lives, you can die, you can change it in a number of ways. Essentially, when you get down to your last life or your red life, you have to attack all the other players. Any alliances are broken, and your single goal is death. They record one session a week, and every session has a boogeyman. The boogeyman's role is to kill someone, and if they fail to do so, then at the start of the next session, they will go down to their last life. But you already know all that, because if you don't, then you should definitely go and check out Last Life, and you will not understand anything in this video, because this is going to be an alternate universe in Last Life, wherein Mumbo made a very small decision that had massive repercussions. Let's begin. At the start of Last Life, there was a small, likely forgotten interaction between 3 of the players. Mumbo had agreed to ally with Good Times with Scar, but then Green came and offered him 5 fish to switch sides, and Mumbo accepted this offer, and so the Southlands were born. Obviously, the joke was that 5 fish is a total deal. Haha, funny. But what if he hadn't said yes? How would events have played out in the rest of the series? How would this change the paths of both Green and Scar? And most importantly, would it change the eventual winner of Last Life? Let's start in episode 1. Events proceed fairly normally until Green makes the offer, at which point, instead of accepting, Mumbo says, "What? Green, 5 fish? Is that all you think I'm worth?" Green would protest. "Well, it's the start of the season. I don't have anything good to offer you." But Mumbo would persist. "Look, buddy, I can't take that. I'm gonna have to stick with Scar, I'm afraid." Scar would cheer, "Woohoo, yes! Take that, Green. Come on, Mumbo, let's get out of here." And the two would leave, and that's all that would change drastically for the first episode. Of course, there'd be subtle changes, but nothing really worth mentioning. But now comes episode 2, and everything changes. Because in this one, Scar's the boogeyman. However, there is one interesting discussion. Who would have the enchanting table? Now, I'd like to say that Scar would give it to Mumbo, because then I can create brand new plot lines. I don't think that's going to be true. See, Mumbo isn't as much of a chaotic person as Scar is, so he probably wouldn't be too happy about Scar having taken the enchanting table. He wouldn't try to put it back, he'd just kind of be a bit uncomfortable with the situation. So then, Scar would realise this, and he wouldn't give him over the enchanting table in case Mumbo did put it back. He wouldn't give it to Joel either, like he did in the real timeline. See, now he has 2 allies. The last thing he wants is to show favouritism between the 2 of them, give the enchanting table to Joel, and then risk losing Mumbo. So instead, he'd keep it for himself. And Mumbo would still go to the Nether, but this time the portal would be from Magical Mountain, not from the Southlands. So I don't think he'd die in the Bastion this time, not least because he'd spawn in a different place than the Nether. Of course, there are too many variables to know for sure, but even if he did go into the Bastion, if he was alone, he'd have been a bit more careful, taking his time, covered up all the lava. However, it was still early game, he was still on the Nether, so he probably would have died at some point. Now after this, Mumbo would probably go off exploring at some point and run into the Southerners heading to Magical Mountain. He would be there when they find Joel's trap, just like what actually happened. And Mumbo didn't know before this point that Joel was the boogeyman, and Joel had just tried to kill him, so Mumbo would still kill Joel before Joel could be cured. But now we have an interesting moment. Scar originally killed Mumbo here. Would he do so if they were allies? I think the answer is not if he could help it. He wouldn't want to risk losing such a valuable asset, but he knows he's not the best at PvP. He knows that now, when Mumbo is distracted by the kill, might be the only chance he can get, so he does it. He killed Mumbo. When Mumbo respawns, they have an argument. Mumbo threatens to leave, saying, "Nah, mate, you can't be having this. I'm leaving. I'm out. I'm going back to Green, and then I can get 5 fish." There'll be lots of negotiations that follow. Mumbo didn't actually want to leave because he had nowhere to go. God didn't want Mumbo to leave because he needs as many allies as possible. He knows that people are unlikely to attack him, but if they do, he'll be defenseless. The upshot of this is that Mumbo asks Scar to give him a life. Now, don't get me wrong, Scar loves his lives, but not enough to lose Mumbo. Now, at this point, remember, he still has 5. So Mumbo would say it's only fair that Scar gives back the life he took. Scar would be forced to agree, and Mumbo would stay with Magical Mountain. Meanwhile, Joel killed Scott, and then Pearl killed him. That happens as normal, but Joel didn't have the enchanting table. Scar did, which means the Scottish people don't get it. So they don't sell it to the fairy fort, so Liz does not give her lives to Scott and Pearl. Episode 3 in Team Best want the enchanting table back. They give Scar their armor, not the fairy fort, of course. Scar goes right ahead and steals the table right back. And that's pretty much all the changes today. But then comes episode 4, and things are heating up. See, Mumbo still wants to build his guest farm, but this time there's nobody to go with him. He does it on his own. Now, Joel, as a red name, may or may not have arrived, it doesn't really matter. But if he did, he wouldn't get a kill. See, Mumbo was alert enough to spot him in the actual timeline. He would also be now. The key difference here is that Green wouldn't be there, and so Green wouldn't die. He wouldn't turn red. Everything else proceeds pretty much as normal. Episode 5 now, and huge changes happen here. You see, because Green never turned red, the Southlanders never started to crumble. Jimmy never thought it was weak, and therefore didn't run away with the life at the start with it, the life passing. In the real timeline, he said he only betrayed them because the Southlands were falling apart anyway. It means that now he was never exiled, and so crucially, the exile shack was never built. That will be important for later. Now, Joel is obviously still red, and the Scottish still gets destroyed because he doesn't necessarily need Green to be red to do that. But what he does need Green for is getting his lives from Scar. You see, it was Green's idea to force Scar into an obsidian box and force him to give him and Joel lives. And Green not being red, this wouldn't happen. Scar would still give his lives to Cleo and B-Dubs, and in addition to the one he gave Mumbo, this gets him down to 3 lives. Now at the end he doesn't die in the Southlands lava trap. See, in the first timeline, the true one, he went there to get Green's help, because Green signed the contract when he got his life from Scar. Green never signed the contract in this timeline, so Scar never went to the Southlands, and never turned red. Now when Cleo returns to the Scottish Alliance, having been red, Scott and Pearl both only have 3 lives because they never got the enchanter back from Joel, so they never gained their lives from Liz, which means that Cleo does not get gifted life because they just can't afford it, so Cleo remains on 2. And because Green was never red, Scott doesn't see the danger of a red Green, which means he doesn't see the need to hide the Wither Skull with the Shadow Forge. Instead, it stays safe in Green's bunker because Impulse obviously never stole it. So before we get to episode 6, let's take a quick look at everything that's changed so far. Scar's now on light green, Joel is on red, Mumbo's on light green, Liz has 5 lives, Cleo is on yellow, Pearl is on light green, the gas farm is at Magical Mountain, not the Southlands. Scar still has the enchanting table, and there is no exile shack. Episode 6 now. In the real timeline, this was the one with the 6 boogeymen, Etho, B-Dubs, Mumbo, Joel, Jimmy, and Scott. However, in this timeline, Joel is still red, so he doesn't become the boogeyman. Would this mean that someone else like Scar maybe would? I don't know how the boogeyman selection algorithm works, but for the sake of my sanity, I'm going to say no. Let's stick to the original story. Scar does not become a boogeyman. But the thing that does change for Scar is that he never became red, which means he doesn't start the episode by attacking Team Best, which means Tango does not give him a life, so Tango keeps his 5 lives. So the Southerners still go to spy on Team Best, and Etho, who is still boogeyman, throws the poison potion. Because Momo isn't there, B-Dubs doesn't die. Instead, because B-Dubs is boogeyman, it's him who takes this opportunity and kills the closest person. I rewatched the episode and the closest person, aside from Mumbo, is actually Etho, but B-Dubs didn't know that Etho hadn't been affected by the poison. So B-Dubs attacks him, but Etho fights back, eventually killing B-Dubs and curing himself. B-Dubs now joins Joel as a red life. Joel still wants to trap Lizzie, whether red or muggy, because he is such a great husband. So he goes over to the Shadow Fort, both timelines, although in this one B-Dubs comes with him. So when he gets discovered, and when Liz accidentally breaks the block of dirt and triggers the Observer, it's Joel and B-Dubs who both die. Because they're red, they're out of the series now. Permanently. And of course, Liz does then not get killed by Joel afterwards. Green and Impulse can get the Wither Skull from Team Best just the same, and obviously they never lost Green's Skull, which is I thought. Now, because B-Dubs was eliminated at the start, it means that Tango does not give him a life. And it means that B-Dubs does not then kill Tango. So, again, Tango still has 5 lives. As Scott kills Impulse as he originally did, nothing changes there. When Impulse returns to find the skull and he fails, he still goes to the Nether and still obtains the final skull. Green now has all 3. So because Mumbo wasn't there at the start with the poison potion, he never turned red, which means that he never tried to attack Scott, which means that Scott never killed himself by accidentally throwing an ender pearl. So Scott keeps his lives. Now Jimmy still triggers Liz's trap and he still turns red, but he doesn't have the exile track anymore. However, he'd still go back to collect his stuff, he'd still find Liz's secret chest now exposed, and it wouldn't be too hard for him to take some of her stuff and lure her back to the Southlands. He'd quickly install the same lava trap there, and of course, she falls forward. But because she didn't lose her life to Joel this episode, or donate her life to Scott or Pearl on episode 2, she's still on 4. The final boogeyman, of course, was Mumbo. His plan would probably be to use end crystals to kill Scar, but he doesn't want to be a hypocrite after episode 2. So he'd just straight up tell Scar he was a boogeyman, and he'd offer to kill Scar and then give him back for life. Scar would accept, but Mumbo has to sign one of the contracts to stay allies even in the red. Deal will be done, Mumbo will be cured, but down to 2 lives. Scar obviously was still drowned at the Scottish Tower, dropping down to yellow. And finally, Team Best, albeit without B-Dubs, still tried to make their TNT cannon at Scar's base, so Skiz still ends up dying and going to red. So at the end of episode 6, let's summarise what's happened so far. Skiz and Jimmy are the only reds, B-Dubs and Joel are dead, Scar has the Enchanter, the guest farm is not at the Southlands, it's at Magical Mountain, Tango has 5 lives, Liz and Mumbo both have 2 lives. See the snowball effect? 5 fish have had a pretty huge impact. Now episode 7, we're in the endgame now. Instead of Mumbo, the Southerners have to hire Skiz to kill Ethan, and Skiz fails just as much. Without Mumbo being red, and without Green and Impulse at the guest farm, Impulse does not get yeeted to his doom. You know what, I'm noticing now a lot fewer deaths when Mumbo and Green aren't together. Maybe those 5 fish actually did cause the demise of the entire server. So Liz, not red, and Joel, not alive, don't cover the Scottish in lava. Mumbo and Jimmy don't get eliminated because Mumbo doesn't try to trap Green and Martin. Joel, who is obviously dead, can't kill Green, so instead, it's Martin who does. If Martin would still have been with Green when Martin was chosen as boogeyman. With Joel dead and unable to steal the kill, Green turns red by Martin's hand, which means he does not go and attack Tango. Now Liz isn't red, so she doesn't attack Bigby. However, Bigby still does to one of Pearl's chest traps, taking him down to yellow. Now Impulse, who isn't red, doesn't go with Skiz to attack the teleport. It's entirely possible Skiz wouldn't have won at all, but let's say he did. In this case, Scott still would have seen, still would have come to help, Skiz would have been shot, eliminated as well. Green, now impulseless, summons the Wither at the Team Best base, but this time B-Dubs is gone, and Tango is there instead with his 5 lives. So let's assume that Tango takes B-Dubs' place, in which case he would drop down to 4 as Ether takes down the Wither. Obviously, in the original timeline, it was B-Dubs who lost a life, taking him down to red. Now, while originally Green and Impulse sniped the greens and yellows, now it's only Green. So instead of Scott eliminating Impulse, he gets Green. Green is out of the series. After the Wither fight, the Reds and the non-Reds don't regroup respectively, like they did in the real version. The reason for this is as follows. On the non-red side, it's Tango and Liz on 4, when Scott, Pearl, and Ether on 3, and Mumbo, Cleo, Impulse, and Bigby on 2. Pearl has 4 lives, but her power failed him and she couldn't join for the second part. Martin has 3 lives, but they couldn't find him. And Scott has 2 lives, but couldn't play that day for health reasons. Concurrently, on the red team, it's Jimmy. Just Jimmy. You see the problem. And of course, on the dead team, it's Joel, Green, and B-Dubs. So they all go back to their natural bases. Ethan and Tango go back to the Team Best base, or I guess it's Team Et at this point, which has been ruined by the Wither, but is still technically habitable. while Scott and Cleo return to the Scottish Tower, which isn't encased in lava. Ren, Liz, and Bigby head to the Shadow Tower, which has experienced 2 explosions in the course of the 1 episode. Liz gives one of her 4 lives to Bigby, so they all have 3 now. Martin returns with impulse to the Southlands, and Mumbo heads to Magical Mountain. So now we're left with Jimmy, the only Red, not allowed to return to the Southlands, and crucially, not having built his exiled hut. So where'd he go? What'd he do instead? He killed someone. Question is, who? I believe he would want to kill a yellow name. The reason for this is simple. If he kills a yellow, he creates a red, and a red would want to ally with him. See, you might think it's kind of strange that a red would ally with their killer, but this is the same thing that happened with Green and Joel. Joel killed Green, but Green still allied with him in the real timeline. This is. That's because when you're the second red, there's only one other red on the server. It's a very vulnerable position to be on your own. So Jimmy would realise if he could kill a yellow, he would be able to get an alliance with the resulting red. So the question is, which yellow would he kill? Well, he would go for Mumbo. Fairly obvious, Mumbo's on his own, everyone else is with an alliance, but of course Mumbo doesn't have Scar with him. So Jimmy heads to Magical Mountain. Mumbo tries to use his Zen crystals, which are deadly, don't get me wrong, but they're very difficult to use. See, it takes time to place the obsidian and the crystal, and then if Jimmy sees it and moves away, there's nothing Mumbo can do. So although I do believe Mumbo would try to use end crystals, he'd have to resort to more traditional weapons if he wanted to. Jimmy isn't the best at PvP either though, so the fight would be more funny than intense. However, at the end of it, I think Mumbo would win. The reason for this is that Timmy would abandon ship after less damage than Mumbo would. Essentially, he'd run away fast. Mumbo would chase him, and a couple of hours later, or maybe a well-timed crystal, and no more red on the server. Wait, what's this? There's more runtime left on Martin's video. See, Martin, of course, was the Shadow Fart, the secret member of the Fairy Fort Alliance. He would announce at the end of his video he's going to leave the crumbling Southlands and officially join the Shadow Alliance at the start of the next one, like he did originally. But in this series of events, he's actually abandoning Impulse. And Impulse swears revenge.